really good to be here talking. It's quite a long time since we've spoken face to face, actually. And from being in the south of England, you're now in well, not quite north of Scotland, but pretty far north. From the glorious Glenalmond, aren't you now?
I am, yeah. I mean, it's. You're right. I was a bit nervous about coming up into what I thought might be the middle of nowhere, but I have to say, we're very lucky. We've got 300 glorious Perthshire acres, but we're only 1 hour from Edinburgh, and so that's and it's motorway all the way. So it's
Well,
it's the best of both worlds.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And there are buses too, I think. So
And there are
there you go.
buses
Yes, yeah.
and a train even. And there's even an overnight train from Perth that gets into King's Cross at 9 a.m.
Everybody should be there. Yes, yeah.
Everybody should.
But what we're here to talk about is because you've got a particular focus and interest in leadership, haven't you? I mean, and leadership in schools. What's led you to that, to feeling that leadership is so important?
I mean, I was really fortunate in that I did a history degree, and then I went straight from university to Sandhurst, and I then spent 8 years as an officer in the British Army in an infantry battalion. So, really leading soldiers. And that, I will always, I mean, I left 25 years ago now, but I will always first and foremost see myself as a soldier. And Sandhurst was an absolutely formative experience in my life. And it's, I think it's the finest military academy in the world. Of course, I would say that, but I genuinely do. And I think the Army's approach to leadership is outstanding. And so I was very fortunate to go there. I was very fortunate to lead soldiers for 8 years all over the world and in some challenging environments. And then I left the Army, became a management consultant briefly, saw actually some poor leadership, I thought, in the sort of civilian world, which was an eye-opener in its own way. And then went off to school. And one of the things that interested me from the day I arrived in a school, I always thought I want to be a head. And I was quite surprised that not everyone wanted to be a head.
That's very true.
And that got me, I think that's an interesting discussion in its own right. But then I did an MBA at Henley Business School, and my dissertation was on leadership development in the independent sector and what it could learn from leadership development in the British Army. And if you like, on the back of that, I had a very good head. I was deputy head at the time. My head said, let's set up our own preparation for middle and senior leadership course here at school. So I was lucky enough to be able to do that. And I've then done that at the schools where I've been a head. I've been on the HMC Professional Development Committee for 8 years. And that whole question of leadership development, not just of staff, but of pupils, is something actually where I felt that schools needed to be better. I have to say, I think schools and our sector particularly has made great strides over the last sort of 8 to 10 years. But because of that, it's always been something, I think, that has interested me.
So what do British independent schools have to learn from the British Army in terms of leadership? I mean, what does that come down to?
I mean, I felt that, again, I remember when I was was head of sixth form and I was considering a sort of move into senior leadership. And I went on a course, and it was almost, here's a folder, go away, learn what's in this folder, and you'll become a leader. And, I felt that too much of the focus was on senior leaders. There wasn't enough on this idea of you are a leader in the classroom, that actually identifying potential. And an HMC head, I remember this vividly. I mean, we're talking over 10 years ago, when I talked about how heads became heads and what was the pathway, he said, he used the word ad hocery, and it's a great word, and he basically meant that everyone who becomes an HMC head, you would think, is a pretty good leader, but actually if the development and the identification of potential isn't there, then actually there'll be an awful lot of people overlooked, and our sector, well, teaching cannot afford to overlook good people. So I think it's this idea that from the day you arrive, identify potential, give people opportunities. And I would say, I talked about why I thought the British Army was so good. The Army focuses on experiential learning. You're put in challenging situations, you're supported, but you're put in a difficult situation that has meaning and purpose and a real impact. And then that develops trust. You take a risk, it's calculated risk, that develops trust. As trust increases, so does performance, and so on. And I felt that schools, again, based on my research, there were two conclusions I made. Too many schools hoard their best staff, and too many schools appoint people on experience, not on potential.
Yes, yeah. Well, they do say about so Timsons, the people who make the key, who sort of keys, that they employ for attitude, don't they? And then and potential in that respect, and then for well, they can teach the skills, and people can learn the skills. So I suppose there's an element of that feeds into your thinking there too.
Completely. I mean, a phrase I often use is that attitude trumps aptitude every time, because you can teach skills, but it's much harder to teach optimism, to teach resilience. You need to teach that determination, and things like, if someone's optimistic, well, that just in itself lifts everyone about them, around them. And I do think that. I do think attitude is everything. Absolutely.
And it's a discipline. I always used to say that being optimistic is a discipline, and it becomes something that can become part of you. And I would describe myself as resolutely optimistic. But there's an element there that you could, at different stages in your life, go down a route of more pessimism, more stepping backwards and so on. But actually, if you work at it, it becomes part of your fibre, your moral fibre, I suppose, too.
Look, I agree with that completely, and I think it's linked to being able to see the good in people and the good in situations. And I mean, Helen, you and I both know one of the great beauties of working in a school is that it does stop you becoming cynical and bitter and pessimistic, because you're working with young people who do daft things and funny things and make you laugh, but also tend to have loads of optimism. And joy de vivre, and that's to me, that's almost the best thing about working in a school.
Yes, yeah. And talking about the students, then, how has your thinking evolved to develop those leadership attitudes, the leadership potential, the leadership experiences in young people? How's that translated into your work?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things, again, when I was doing my MBA dissertation, I remember reading a piece of research that suggested that absolutely leaders can be made, not just born, which I completely agree with, but actually your potential for leadership to an extent is established by the time you're sort of 18, 19, 20. And if that's correct, then actually what happens to you at school, what happens to you at university, what happens when you first start a job, a sort of graduate training program, is really, really important. And, one of the interesting, the school I was at as a deputy head, we were an NQT, as they were then, training centre. And so once a term, we had a whole load of NQTs, and I used to for 3 years, I used them as my sort of research guinea pigs. And I remember asking them all, do you consider yourself a leader, in a questionnaire? And something like only 5% did. And yet, you're standing in front of a class. What are you doing? You're motivating, you're setting an example, you're leading by example, you're getting the best, you're bringing them together. And that really, made a big impact on me in terms of this idea of young teachers seeing themselves as leaders. But actually, it's the same for pupils. Leadership for pupils is not just about being captain of this or being a school prefect or chair of the school council. It's about the example you set, and it comes back to attitude. And if you're on time for lessons with the right stuff, and you're engaged in debates, you do your best, you get stuck in, you try new things, that is leadership by example, which, again, as we know so well, is the most powerful form of leadership. And leadership is not about having a title or a badge. It is about an attitude and about a behavior.
And you're saying something that resonates very strongly with the coaching, which I do with leaders as well, which is about leading yourself. So knowing yourself first, and then leading yourself. Because if you can lead yourself, you can lead others as well. You can articulate that. It's not always straightforward, though, is it? I mean, with children, it needs teachers and other leaders to really understand that in order to be able to help the young people constantly refresh their own ability to be able to focus on their own leadership.
So it's not straightforward at all, because human beings are not straightforward. But I think, I had a deputy at a previous school who had a great line. He said, if you trust borders, and he was talking specifically about borders, but You know, if you trust boarders, they'll let you down. If you don't trust them, they'll do you down. And actually, it's quite a good phrase. And the point that I took from that is, you know, pupils at school will make mistakes.
Yes.
And that's education, actually, is making mistakes and learning from it. And that's no bad thing. It's a bit like failure. You know, you will fail, you learn from it. That's education. And if you have a culture where it's thought you've got to be a sort of goody two-shoes and perfect in order to become a leader, you know, in the sixth form, then actually that's not healthy at all. And if you've got this culture where, you know, it's a great phrase, and I can't remember where I got it, but I use it with staff, thinking out loud, you know, expressing what you're concerned about, your vulnerabilities. I've tried this in class, it didn't really work. Can anyone think how I might do it better? You know, it's that piece about being vulnerable. And actually that culture allows people to grow and develop without a fear that they have to meet a standard all the time. And I would say leadership development, you know, it is about culture, isn't it? You can say what you like, but if you're not mirroring your behavior, your words with your behaviors, then it won't work. So you've got to do what you do with the teaching, but amongst the staff, that then impacts it and sort of cascades down into the pupils.
So thinking about the sector as a whole, and this is a very broad question, but how long do you think it might take until the sector gets to a point where the British Army could learn from the independent school sector?
Look, again, I don't want to sit here as some sort of, you know, bumpty old colonel type figure saying it was all better in my day. There is loads of, you know, there's loads of stuff the British Army could do better, but there's also a lot of, I mean, I really do think, I suppose, through my prism of the HMC Professional Development Committee, that huge strides have been made over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So I think there's lots of good stuff there that's going on in schools about, you know, and I think actually, you know, leading schools during COVID, I mean, anyone who did that, you know, that in itself is like a campaign medal, because that was so demanding and
so hard.
You know, I think what school leaders did extremely well was what it felt like to me at the time was I was just absorbing everyone else's emotion. And it was the classic example of, you made a decision, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, because some people thought that was great, some people thought it was terrible. So I think all leaders can learn from each other. I really do. And one of the, you know, things I enjoy most actually is going to events or conferences where different leaders are talking. And I think the more we have of that, the better. Because, just finally on this point, one of the things that some people have said to me fairly early on in my teaching career was, well, it's very different to the army, isn't it? How have you adapted? But it's not, because people are people. And you know, how you get the best out of people, how you bring people together, how you generate that sense of common purpose and developing and spotting potential. It doesn't matter what sector or area of work it is. We're human beings. We respond to a large extent in the same way.
Brilliant. And if you could give one piece of advice to a new teacher who's just starting this August, this September, what would it be?
It's funny actually, because I've just come from speaking to new staff, and I said, look, one of my responsibilities to you is to support you in your professional aspirations and ambitions, whatever they might be. The second one is to tell you that I trust you to do the job that we're appointing you to do. I will not try and interfere. So flip that on its head. My one piece of advice to anyone really is trust your instincts, first of all, and don't be afraid to take calculated risks.
And step up to the mark.
And step up and enjoy it. Don't forget to enjoy it, because it is the best job in the world.
Yes. Brilliant. Look, Mark, this has been fantastic. And I know you've got to dash and do other things. Really, really nice to catch up and chat about this. And I look forward to doing that again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Helen.